There's a few. Okay, I'll take 2 or 3, and then I'll try and answer them. So the first question was about, well, if you think there's a lack of evidence about the system, why don't you fund more evaluations? Well, how do we get politicians to fund evaluations? I think the issue is one of timing. Actually, most things that certainly the Department for Education started doing while I was there, not all of them, but most of them are being evaluated, but they're still being evaluated even though the thing has actually happened. And when the next set of politicians come in, they'll want to do some different things, and those evaluations may be useful to them, but actually they may want to do some different things altogether. So you need to have more of a base of stuff there at the start rather than just evaluating what you're doing. And of course you need to evaluate what you're doing, and I absolutely agree that everything that happens should be properly evaluated. But it's quite hard to do it in a really controlled way and to say, okay, well, we'll just try this in one local authority and we'll evaluate it, and that'll take a couple of years, and we'll see whether it works, and then we'll just roll it out nationally. Because by the time the 2 years is up, you're not going to be there. So it's just the time lag creates a problem, I think, there. The role of the media, I mean, I could easily spend another 40 minutes talking about the role of the media. I mean, it is very difficult when everything you do is filtered through the media. And most media doesn't have huge respect for evidence-based policy, I think it's fair to say. I think the encouraging thing I'd say is that the shift towards, which is still a slow shift, but towards online and people looking online for their news, means that statements are now challenged more than they were even when I started working in politics 10 years ago. So you have websites like Fact Check and Full Fact, and now when the Treasury does its budget, everyone goes to see the IFS the next day to say, are they pulling any tricks? There are some sort of things around now that are improving things, but at the same time, you're constantly thinking about how the media are going to interpret what you do, and that's another constraint that I didn't focus on enough in my list of constraints. That if you think something is a good idea, but you know you're going to be torn to shreds by every newspaper, the chances that you're going to do it are pretty limited. So yeah, that is another major constraint and a big issue. And then sort of thinking about the underlying principles behind why things work as well as just discovering why they work. I think that's really important, and it's really important when you're thinking about the transferability of something. For example, something like payment by results, where there's mixed evidence, but some evidence that it can work on reducing unemployment or severe cases of unemployment. Now, payment, because there's some evidence of it working in one sphere, everyone in Whitehall wants to use payment by results for everything. But you have to understand why it's working before you know whether it's going to work on something else. So there's been a lot of discussion around using payment by results for Sure Start, but the evidence that you're using for Sure Start is a lot weaker than the evidence you're using for someone now having a job. So its transferability is not so obvious. So I completely agree. Again, it's a really complicated question, but you do have to understand why things work in an area as well as that they worked. How much time have I got? I've got another 5 minutes, so if there are more questions. Okay, so thank you very much. The first question was about the data that the department has, and the biggest piece of data it has is the National Pupil Database, which is based on the census that happens in all schools in January, has thousands of fields, and is almost impossible to get access to as a researcher. It is an absolute nightmare. It is far too hard to get access to the National Pupil Database. And I think it's a great idea for that to be given to people who can make it much more accessible. I think that would be a huge boost in education research. So completely agree with that point. Second question was, do politicians do enough to get out of the filters that are around them? Probably not. Again, there'll be some that try harder than others, and some that are smarter than others. But it is pretty hard when you're the average day of a politician, will start with, they'll be just having meetings all day. They don't get very much reading time. They're very reliant on what's given to them. It's kind of another sort of crazy aspect of the way the civil service works that you wouldn't find in any other sort of business world, is the way that all of the sort of recommendations and reading that the civil service prepare for a politician is given them in a box at the end of the day, which they read at 10 o'clock at night after they've done all their other meetings, usually after they've had a glass of wine, and then they're sort of given an hour before they go to bed to sort of quickly run through everything and make decisions and so on. You can't really imagine sort of Microsoft sort of putting everything in a box and giving it to the chief executive for them to look at in the evening. So, and I think there are some politicians now in Whitehall who are getting very frustrated with their way, their sort of antiquated ways that information is made available to them, and are trying to find ways to break out of it. And then the final question was on the Royal College of Teaching. And the Royal College of Teaching is one of those things that everyone thinks is a good idea, but it's not quite clear how it's going to happen, because it was going to require a lot of money from somebody to get it up and running. I think it would be great if we could have one. There are other countries who manage to have similar systems. The country I was always most impressed by, although you can't immediately say everything that works there would work over here, but Singapore, the relationship that teachers have with policymaking in Singapore is fantastic. But it's a tiny country. It's the size of a small city, and it's a lot easier to do that there than it is to do it here. But it would be great if we can make it happen, definitely. I think if there's anyone who has any more, I'm going to do 2 more, unless everyone's asked out, and then I'll, because we're almost at the end of the session. Anyone else? No? All right. Okay, well, I'm done, so thank you very much.